The book, Glimmer of Hope, to which David, Jammal, and Alex are contributors, is the subject of tonight's talk. Please join me in welcoming David Hogg, Jammal Levy, Alex Wind, and Sophia Bush.
Well, thank you all so much for coming. Guys, if you don't mind, I think it might be nice for folks who are here, before we even get into our conversation, if each of you will introduce yourselves and let everybody know a little bit about yourselves, so we can personalize this a bit.
Hi, guys. My microphone, there we go. My name is David Hogg, and I'm here with my friends to help save lives in all communities, not just in one place or one zip code, but in every community, and not just the American community, but the worldwide community as a whole that is affected by gun violence. And we understand that as March for Our Lives, we may have started in Parkland, Florida, and at our school where 17 people died, but we understand that violence does not stop in our schools, that every day there are thousands of children that are not only afraid of bullets from coming inside of their school, but are afraid of bullets coming from outside too, that don't get their stories told. With that, we understand that there's a lot of advocacy and importance, there's a lot of responsibility that comes along with our position. So I want to thank each and every one of you for being here tonight, and I hope that each and every one of you votes yes on Amendment 1639, which is a huge deal. On November 6th, each and every one of you and every one of your friends that lives in the state of Washington has the chance to vote for a bill that can cut down on suicides in this state by 10 to 15%. And that's not just a percentage, that's hundreds and thousands of people that cannot die from preventable deaths via gun. 1% of suicide attempts are with a gun, but 50% of suicide deaths are via gun. And if we can help reduce that, like they have in other states like California, we can stand up and be the change to save thousands of people's lives by voting on November 6th, not for just Democrats or Republicans, but for people that are morally just leaders, that represent us and our interests as a people, that represent us demographically and ideologically. And lastly, see us not as customers, but as constituents and living human beings that have a right to bear arms, but have more of a right to live. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alex Wind. I am currently still a senior at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. I am here today to tell our story because at the end of the day, misinformation is the biggest issue in this country, where so much stuff happens, but no one seems to know about it, or no one seems to get the right memo about it. So this book is our words, it's our story, it's everything that happened from February 14th till now, and everyone that was here since day one is in that book, and I'm so excited to be sharing it with all of you, and I'm so happy for all of you to be out here, so thank you so much.
Hi, so my name is Jammal Levy. I graduated from Marjory Stoneman Douglas in 2016. And, while always just caring about what my surroundings, I really became adamant about standing up in relation to gun violence when I lost my best friend, Joaquin Oliver, on February 14th. And it's just, these past couple months, I can, it would be an understatement to say that, my life has changed, but I know it's changed for the better. And I'm so glad that I've been able to spend, the past year of my life with these amazing individuals fighting for change in this world. And, I just know that this book has become, it's become a kind of staple piece in our movement. And it's allowed us to kind of share our trauma and share our pain in a way that is intimate, in a way that is, it's easy to digest for the readers. So I'm glad that every single person became interested in our movement is here tonight. And I think, you guys should give yourself a hand for that because it's so important that we all stand together, in this fight. Because at the end of the day, it's going to take us all to end the gun violence in this country. So thank you guys for coming, and thank you guys for being the people that you are.
So before we jump into questions, I revisited a little piece of science today that was actually published in 2014, and I thought it was really appropriate for a day like today. There's an institute here in the US that has actually been able to prove that the energetic field of the human heart, which is able to be experienced by other humans, has a radius of 8 feet from our bodies. And everybody's here because your hearts have been affected by what happened to these kids and by what's happened to kids and families and friends across our country and across the world. So as we sit here to hold space for these incredible gentlemen and for this conversation, I just want to speak the truth that every person in this room is sitting inside of the heart space of the people next to them. And this, when we're faced with trauma and violence, this is the first step to healing communities, to show up and hold space for each other, to be willing to listen, to be willing to open your minds to fight fear with facts, as these kids are traveling around the country doing. And I just really want to set the intention for the room, because as Jammal just said, it's a big deal that you all showed up on a Sunday night and that you waited very patiently through a security line so we can keep them and all of you safe. And I just want to call that out. And now I'm going to start to ask you guys questions. I made notes. I like to do that. Okay, so something that struck me in the book was the quote that the day after, a dark, daunting purpose consumed all of you, really. And the consensus was that this one had to be different. Because this has happened before, but it's never happened like this. And it's been less than a year, and you guys have written a book. You've made March for Our Lives happen. There are local chapters all across the country. There's local March for Our Lives students here. Thank you all for coming. Woo! You're amazing.
Stand up.
Yeah, guys, stand up. These kids are doing the work here in Washington State. Yes. March for Our Lives has become a movement, and it highlights allies. It's a movement that spans not only this issue, but touches on difficulties and problems faced by people of all ethnicities and religious background and sexuality and sexual identification. And why, I guess even before the why, how does that happen? How did you all set the intention to really cast this enormous and inclusive net when you knew you were starting a movement?
I think the biggest thing was that we didn't know. We didn't know how we were going to do this, and we didn't know what exactly we were going to do. But on February 14th, and since the days after, there have been so many thoughts just swirling through my head. But the biggest, most persisting thought is, I'm not going to let people forget. I am not going to let 17 lives be lost in vain. And I think I can speak for all of us when I can say we just kept talking and we didn't stop. We were tweeting, we were going on the news, we were doing everything we possibly could to get our message out there and to get our word out there. But the thing is that it wasn't just us, it was all of you, because you all listened. And the difference between, what we do versus what some other groups do is that not everyone is always listening. So thank you for listening to us and allowing us to have this platform and allowing us to be here today. Because what is so important is that, now that we are here, we're able to pave a pathway and to help other people and to lift their voices up, the people that have been screaming into air for so long and not getting anywhere. And that's really what is most important.
I love that. The idea that though this is a platform none of you asked for, you're going to make sure you're doing good that has a ripple effect in the world around you with it. the movement started with 6 friends in a living room. And can you tell me a little bit about what those first weeks were like? Because to your point, what changes this is that you all were of an age and a generation where you grew up with the internet. You grew up with Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and you know how to get a message out there. And all of this really came from you guys talking about what comes next. So how did the beginning of this go?
The way that I like to describe it is we really took on like a startup mentality on our, the only way I can think to describe it is kind of like the beginning of The Social Network, if you guys have ever watched that movie. Obviously they were formed out of something completely different and driven by different aspects. We really took on that mentality, and we didn't let anybody else say that. One thing that's important for people to remember is we didn't gain power on February 14th. The only thing that we gained was a belief in ourselves and that we could change the world and stand up to violence and injustice as people. The only difference was that we stopped waiting for somebody else to do it for us.
Yes.
And part of that was listening. Like when Alex talks about listening, one thing that I like to reiterate that I've learned along the way is the importance of listening, not to respond, but to learn. And that's what you guys have shown us. You listen to the young people that have stood up and spoke out against this violence, that are disproportionately affected by gun violence, being young people. And just listen to learn how you guys can help. And that's incredibly empowering and impactful on us, because you've, for really the first time, I think in our generation, we've been told not like you're stupid and you shouldn't be involved in the political process, but you can, and we fully believe and support you guys, which is incredibly empowering, because each and every single one of you that's here right now is part of a huge and massive cultural shift that you're in, so you may not realize it, but it's a shift not towards the right or left, but towards the and getting involved at all period in the political process and caring about what's going on in our communities and recognizing that the problems that we face every day are not issues that can't be solved, but issues that have to be solved by us. So thank you guys.
And it's interesting, to your point, civic engagement for a very long time has been marketed, or I guess not marketed, as this idea that it's really for the few, and you have to have a certain kind of education, and certain people get to be experts. But we live in an era where information is democratized. Anybody can learn about policy. Everybody has Google access. You can really take your passion for your community and turn it into engagement in a way that hasn't really felt possible before. But do you think that part of that stuff feeling inaccessible to maybe earlier generations is why, on the fear rather than fact side, you get the sort of accusation that you might be crisis actors, or there's no way that kids your age could possibly know any of this stuff about policy, or why are you so well-spoken? What do you say to that?
The only form of payment that I've ever gotten for media training was my 4 years in TV production through my amazing TV production teacher, Eric Garner, and my 4 years of speech and debate with my debate teachers, Jesus Caro, who is an amazing person my public education gave me the ability to learn about universal background checks before there even was a shooting at our school. And if you are the type of person that says young people should not be involved in the political process after saying that young people are too lazy to get involved, you know what saying young people aren't educated enough to be involved in the political process sounds like to me? A wonderful excuse to fund public education and more civics education for young people.
Yes. Interesting how your education is working and people say there's no way it could be working so well. You're like, who do you think made me smart?
Yeah, exactly.
Hello.
And the fact that people in America in general would rather believe that we're like crisis actors than actually well-informed individuals that care about what's going on in our community as young people says so much more about America about ourselves than us. And the fact that we'd rather arm ourselves and arm teachers than discuss what's actually causing this violence in our community in the first place says a lot about us, and we have to change that.
Yeah, I think the reason we kind of get that reaction generally is because it's the same reason why when, say like a black person commits a crime, it's easy to cast them off as a criminal. When an immigrant from a Latin country commits a crime, it's easy to call them
something horrible we won't say.
Yeah, and it's the same thing, if a brown person comes from any other country, it's easy to call them a terrorist. And for me, it's what we've seen is it's easy not to care when you create that disconnect. And a lot of the time we've seen that the minute we start telling our story, telling exactly what we've had to go through and what we've had to endure these past couple months, a lot of people start to be like, wow, these really are just kids. And for us, it's been amazing because Dave has brought a great point. All of us are testaments to that. If you actually fund education, you will start to create articulate, brilliant individuals. And we just saw it, because I sat down one day and I was just like it is almost an anomaly that almost everyone from March for Our Lives can either give an elaborate speech, sit on a panel, and talk you around facts and figures 24/7. It's the idea that where we come from and where we went to school, that is the priority. And people just don't want to believe that because it just seems unreal in the sense. But for us, it's just continuously speaking and letting people know that, we are what America can look like and what America does look like. Because oftentimes we get so caught up in what the apparent things are, and we don't realize that there are amazing individuals left and right doing this work. And it's not just only caring about what happened to us, it's about noticing that everywhere else, this still happens, and there are still individuals who are just as articulate, just as brilliant, doing the same kind of work. And I think it's just about relating. It's about being empathetic, really. Just being able to care about another person. So once we started kind of releasing our trauma and releasing our truth, I think that's we just started to shift those reactions, really.
Absolutely, because I've been amazed at how many people have said, well, there's just no way to solve this problem. And there are ways to solve this problem, actually. But so many people think it's complex, it's impossible, it's not going to happen. And then they listen to you guys. And they realize that it doesn't matter how complex the problem might be, we have to work to solve it. So I guess I have a question both for your peers, because the facts state, and I'm not hating on any age group here, I'm just stating a fact, that 73% of people in America who are classified by whoever does the classification, it's not me, I think you're all still young and fantastic, but 73% of people who are classified as elderly vote, and 26% of people who are classified as millennials, I just make the cut, thank you, vote. So what do you say to people in your peer group who aren't voting, and what do you say to people in the elderly peer group who might say there's just no way to solve this? What's your answer for them?
What I say is, first off, fund civics education so we actually know how our government works.
So vote for people who make funding civics education part of their platform.
Yeah, so secondly, on that topic, we have to make voting in this country easier, with the understanding that advocating for election security is not pro-election security, it's anti-democracy.
Exactly.
When you advocate, when you purge thousands of voters from the voter rolls that are primarily people of color, and you're a person that's literally the referee of the race that you're running in, that is active voter suppression.
Exactly.
When 21% of otherwise eligible African Americans can't vote in Florida because of a previous conviction that they've served their time for and paid their debt to society for, that is not pro-criminal justice, that is anti-democracy.
And I think it's quite ridiculous that on the road to change, I know you remember, we've had peers who would come from what, like you said, whoever creates these classifications, what someone would deem an underprivileged community. And I find it ridiculous that, he said to me that he didn't learn about civics until his last year in high school. Last year in high school. And I know for a fact that the first time I started learning about politics or just being engaged in my community, I was in grade school, the first, second grade, and you start learning about how this political system works. And I think that, like David said, that is the purest form of voter suppression. Because you see time and time again, we were canvassing in Chicago, we were canvassing in Houston, we were canvassing in LA, and what we saw was most of the people, most of the doors we knocked on, most people are registered. They are. But time and time, people are just feel so let down by this system and how the system actively suppresses them. And it shows time and time again. It's like when we say, you know, we want to vote in morally just leaders, because at this point in time, it's not about whether you're lying. It's whether or not you represent your constituents, because that's what's really important at the end of the day. So for us, what we've seen is we've seen that time and time again, the politicians that we have elected have failed to represent us. And I think for the first time in history, we're noticing that there's this energy among people where we think there's hope. You know, I don't want to do this shameless plug, but there's this glimmer of hope for the first time in history. Not the first time in history, but the first time in a long time. And we've seen time and time again, whether it was if it was Obama or if it was us, hope moves people. And I think for right now, it's using that energy and centering it to create change, really.
What kind of feedback do you guys get? Because this is a movement, clearly. And when you see 1 million people take to the streets to support you, to your point, I think it has something to do with the fact that, you know, 97% of polled Americans say that they support this idea of universal nationwide background checks. Because if somebody can't buy a gun in one state, they shouldn't be allowed to buy a gun in another. If you're on a watch list and you can't buy a plane ticket, I'm unclear as to why you can buy a weapon of war. These things feel like common sense, but politicians aren't listening because they haven't had to feel it yet. So when you're looking at a movement, you know, you had social media to create this viral messaging on. You had the Women's March as a great model. It just happened, and you knew if the ladies could do it, y'all could do it. And I just mean, like, if we're angry enough to start a march with millions of people, we can do too.
Exactly, and you weren't just angry enough to march, you were running for office in a record number this year. And that's what we're voting on, is a massive change in it.
Yes. So when we see the impact of social movements like this, what movements do you guys look at in history? Who gives you your first glimmer of hope? Who do you look back to and say, that happened, that's my inspiration, we can do that?
The Freedom Riders, easily.
That was going to be my answer too.
You know, growing up and learning about them and then following their pathway over the summer was absolutely insane. I got to meet a couple Freedom Riders in Alabama and in Georgia, and I walked the Edmund Pettus Bridge with people that walked there the same days in 1960s, and it is absolutely insane, the work that they did, but how much work still needs to be done today, and how much people are still working today about the same issues, fighting voter suppression of African Americans, fighting violence against African Americans by police. It's all this stuff that people were fighting about in the 60s, and we're still fighting about it now. Why is that? You know, and I think about, you know, we see 97% of people believe in universal background checks. But the issue is that a lot of people don't call up their politicians and say, hey, I support universal background checks. You should draft a bill about that. Voting is the most important thing that you can do civically, but after that, if you call your politicians, you go to their district offices, their state offices, and make sure that they know, hey, I'm your constituent. You can be doing this. You can be changing the world. You can be on the right side of history. You need to convey that message to the politicians. Show them that if they support this, that they will be on the right side of history. And if they're not, you can vote them out.
And I think obviously when you see movements, you have to pay respect to the civil rights movement. But I think one movement that really did inspire us, because I remember, you know, David and I were having a conversation before the tour happened, and we were calling people up and we were asking, why did people people feel it was necessary to stand, to speak out against the Vietnam War? And then we started doing a lot of research, and we started seeing that, we noticed that, first off, the reason why people felt so adamant about it was because they had no other choice but to see it every night. People saw their friends, their family members coming home in body bags. From that moment, that was something that really resonated with us, because we saw that outcome moved people. And not only that, when you look at the anti-war movement, when you look at the civil rights movement, there's a common denominator, and that's young people. Young people are the individuals at the forefront fighting day in and day out to make sure that their voices were heard. And for us, it's it's the same reason why today we always speak about how representation matters. Because sometimes all it takes is just to see that one person that doesn't necessarily have to look like you, but that you can relate to. And I think that's what moves people. And for us, is that really inspired us, because at the same time, we knew there was no blueprint to this. There really wasn't. And like you said earlier, it was just really knowing that we didn't want this to continue, and that we knew that we had to do something. And we knew that that was just enough to keep us moving. And so I know for a fact those two movements really inspired us, and not only that, but each other. Because at the end of the day, there's being an activist, I'll tell you, it's hard work. You wake, I got a couple of laughs, you know what I'm talking about. And it's like you something happens to you, and then you kind of grow attached to this cause. So I think, this starts the cycle where you start to pour every part of yourself into this. And at one point you realize there's nothing left for you. You poured yourself into everything. You poured yourself into the world. And then you sit back and look, and you're like, what's left for me? And what we had to realize is that we had to grow this, we had to build a strong support system for one another. And that was so important for us, because it seemed that when Alex is having a bad day, I can be there for him, or vice versa. And then realize it just, like I said, it really humanized our movement and let us know that we don't have to be perfect all the time. And that's just a message. I think that's what we really wanted to show you with the Glimmer of Hope, was that this was in no way perfect. There was bickering. There was nights where we were just like, I don't know if we could do this. I mean, we went on a 60-day road trip across the country. We visited, in that time span, we visited more congressional districts than any politician. And this is a group of what, at that point in time, was it 15 through 20-year-olds? So we had no clue what we were doing. We just got on the bus in the morning, made sure we didn't miss call time, ate breakfast, and just started engaging and just letting people know, I hurt, I know you hurt, but at the same time, we have each other. And that was what kept us going. And then when the cameras were off, we had each other. So I think at the end of the day, for me especially, that's what's been so inspirational, is because sometimes you just need to know that.
I just would like to call out that I'm very inspired that a group of high school students and early college students held more town halls than their elected officials. That's a real big deal. Why do you guys, because your tour, obviously, we were talking about how there's a bit of trial by fire. You choose to become an activist, you dedicate your life, and you better get hyper-educated on policy. You better be able to talk any of these points with people, because not only do you want to do your best, you understand the magnitude of your mission. And you'll be on the receiving end, unfortunately, of a lot of criticism, and for whatever reason, hundreds or thousands of people can come and be loving, but some of the things that those small groups of critics say really kind of worm their way in.
Yeah, the group of 20 counter-protesters shouting my name, with loaded AR-15s in the middle of Dallas, Texas in the summer.
Yeah.
And going out and speaking to them.
Why do you think that even in the face of the honesty and the vulnerability and the complexity, to your point, that you guys have been so willing to show people, you show up as full human beings. So much of our news, so much of our media, we consume it through a phone and a computer screen. Everything feels two-dimensional. And we forget that human beings are three-dimensional. It's not black and white. We are complex. In the midst of tragedy, sometimes we find laughter with our best friends. Why do you think after your big trial by fire, after the nearly year that you've been experiencing this and learning more than most of our elected officials seem to know, why do you think that gun violence and gun safety are such polarizing, hot-button issues in this country? Because you see all of it. Like, you have all the data. So what do you guys think it is?
It's propaganda from the NRA. That's purely what it is. Before 1980, public polling of, I spend hours every day researching gun violence because honestly, being a debate student and a former journalist and news director of my high school TV production class, and being basically an amateur journalist, I want whatever solutions work to end gun violence in America is what I want. If arming every single teacher and putting gun vending machines on every street corner actually worked, I would be all for it. But the fact of the matter is it doesn't, and thousands of studies have shown that again and again. And the fact of the matter is that every more developed country with the exact same rates of bullying or similar to the rates of bullying and mental illness as America has, because most have similar rates to us, don't have the same amounts of gun violence, and it's because the way that they've addressed gun violence is the way that we should too, and that's not with more guns, but with the common sense policies, where if you're a hunter and you choose to go out and still go hunting, you can, but they still have a right to bear arms. They don't have a right to gun violence, And
so why do you think everybody out there who's upset about this magical movement thinks you're trying to take their guns away?
Because, it's that public polling from the NRA. It's the belief that self-defense gun use actually defends you, when in reality, a majority of a majority of self-defense gun use, public polling that they've actually gone back and done studies on, because the way the NRA gets these statistics on self-defense gun use is by phone calls. Half of the instances that they claim are self-defense are actually against animals. And on that topic, there was a study that was done by by the Institute of Public Policy at Harvard and multiple other universities in collaboration that showed of all the homicides that were committed in 1 year that were called self-defense gun use, which the NRA said there were about 500,000 of, they only found that of all the homicides that they could even find through those telephone surveys which they called back people on, there were only 373 justifiable homicides in the United States in 1 year. What they don't talk about when they're mentioning self-defense gun use is the fact that when people are breaking into your household, they've done public polling of criminals that have been arrested for breaking and entering into households that have been shot, and they ask them, well, why were you armed? And they say, in case the person I broke into the house was home and was armed. And the important thing to remember there is if they were home. Most of the people that are breaking into houses are just breaking in to steal things. The people that are breaking in to steal things are there carrying a gun in case you have a gun. And study after study has shown that if you were using a gun in that situation, the odds of you being killed goes up 200% than if you were using a baseball bat. More likely than not, that gun's going to be used against you. And on that topic, what the NRA doesn't talk about when they're talking about self-defense gun use is the thousands of children that are killed every decade by their parents, mistaking them for intruders. Mm-hmm. One of those children was a child in Dallas, Texas, a couple of years ago, who was 7 years old and was hiding in her closet, waiting for her dad to come home after a late night job. He comes home and she jumps out and surprises him, and he shoots and kills her on the spot. She died in his arms, and the last words she said to him were, "Daddy, I love you." There are thousands of stories like that we don't ever hear about because the NRA doesn't want us to know that. It is propaganda that is fed to us constantly, that you need a gun to defend yourself, when in reality, the issue that we should be talking about is why we feel the need to arm ourselves in the first place. And lastly, the important thing to understand here is, in the same way the people that advocated, the best way for me to, that I've found to make people understand what we advocate for, in the same way that people that advocated for safer cars and roads weren't anti-car or pro-car, they were pro-people not dying, we are pro-people not dying.
And just as far as some statistics go, because something I see is interesting in the wake of y'all's activism is, because I follow them all very closely because I'm very passionate about your cause, and as a journalism student myself, I know that I have to follow people who oppose what I believe so I can understand how they're arguing. And I find as the woman up here on stage with you, I find it so deeply insulting that now the NRA is marketing guns for women as these self-defense objects because they're saying, well, we have a problem of domestic violence here in America, and as a woman in a domestic situation, you're 5 times more likely to die if there's a gun in the home than if there isn't. So as everyone leaves here today and we talk about facts, I understand what the romantic notion is as a storyteller of, well, I should be able to protect myself. Well, I get it. But to your point, the data has to be what informs us, because regardless of our emotional response to anything, math is perfect. 2 + 2 will always equal 4. And if, as a woman, I'm 5 times more likely to die in a domestic situation when a gun is present in the home, it's my responsibility to advocate on that fact with other women. It's our responsibility here as we hold space for these gentlemen and as we hold space for anyone else in the room who might also be a survivor or a person who's lost someone to gun violence. The numbers matter so much in the conversations you will go out and have in your communities in the coming week and hopefully in the coming, less than 20 days until the midterms. Please make everyone vote. Thanks.
And I think also, to your point, the NRA talks about, you need to buy a gun in case of a domestic abuser, but they don't talk about removing guns from domestic abusers.
Yep.
And another thing that just shocks me so much, you talk about advertising guns for women and, all this stuff. They try to make guns look cool and sexy, but cigarettes were like that too. But look at what cigarettes are like now. We, as a society, can create that shift where we create this idea that the gun industry is just like the tobacco industry. It is dangerous to own, they are dangerous to have, and they will kill you.
And to talk about this idea of what's cool or what's very American, or maybe it's, I don't know, like the romanticization of John Wayne cowboy culture. I don't know what it is. There is a big pushback always on the Second Amendment. People say, well, but it's part of our constitutional right, and we have a right to bear arms. And my argument always, and this comes as a person, as I told you guys backstage, like, I worked on a cop show, guys. Like, I trained with a SWAT team. I'm like a great shot. And I understand the hobby aspect, but I've been in police departments. I know what kinds of equipment they have. And if you do just a little bit of research, you'll learn that the military donates for the tax write-offs insane weapons and vehicles of war to police departments all across America that none of us could ever access. So this idea that we're supposed to be a well-regulated militia so that we might defend ourselves against our law enforcement should they ever turn on us, I'm like, the ship has sailed, y'all.
And like, it's not only that, like, because I used to subscribe to that notion before the shooting too, and I actually wanted to see like what the counter arguments to that were, because I was somebody that believed previously that guns were something that we could use to fight off a tyrannical government. But what I did is I actually looked into the research in previous times where people had tried doing armed uprisings against tyrannical governments. And 2 interesting studies that I always like to bring up is one that was done by a series of American academics where they studied for the period of 1906 to 2006. There were 263 nonviolent and violent uprisings that they studied. In this study, the number of violent uprisings that were successful was 21% at overthrowing their government, and less than half were democracies 5 years later. Of the nonviolent uprisings, 55% were successful, and more than half of those were still democracies 5 years later. Secondly, what people fail to bring up is that after the Spanish-American War and the decolonization of the Philippines, there are a flurry of guns left in the Philippines by American hands that somebody came into power and was able to declare martial law because they said that we need to make sure that nobody is able, that because there's so many guns out there and everybody's going to end up, everybody's shooting each other, we have to declare martial law immediately. And that's how they got a dictator implemented into office. And that, like, you don't hear those stories when we're talking about a tyrannical government. Also, you can't take down a Predator drone with an AR-15.
Thank you.
And also, the Second Amendment talks about a well-regulated militia, but you probably had more training with a gun for the shows than people that buy guns actually do.
Oh, 1,000%.
The issue is that...
And they just made me not want them in my house.
Yeah.
I was like, cool, I'm good.
Why is it that to drive a car, you need to have a permit and then a license, and even to get it, you need to pass so many tests, and there's so much you have to go through. You have to register your car, all this stuff. But for a gun, I can walk into a store right now and buy an AR-15. I can walk into a gun show right now and buy an AR-15 if I wanted to, without any experience, without any training, without any knowledge of how to do it, and no background check either. And that is unspeakable of an issue. I don't even know how those words came out of my mouth. Like, I can't even believe that that is a real thing that I can do in this country.
Well, because when you take the political fighting out of it, you realize how insane it is. And the fact that, to your point, it's not about car insurance and driver's licenses and all of these things were never about taking cars off the road. They were about creating safe protocols. And so it requires us, and anybody who doesn't get as hyped on, I guess, either end of the spectrum, to get out and really advocate and have these conversations. Because very often what we hear is the yelling from the extremities of the sides. And I think it's so inspiring that you all are using your story, your advocacy, and also all of your research to try to bring people to a sane middle.
Yeah, exactly. And one other thing that I think we really have to include in this conversation, and one thing that's really surprised me about, sadly, gun violence is how intersectional this issue is and how everybody's affected from different areas. Like, our politicians like to see the value and the validity of your violence or whatever suffering you face based off your zip code or congressional district, but we understand that as human beings, that suffering sees no zip code, no color, and no sex. And one of the first places where we have to start talking about the intersectionality between, toxic masculinity is with gun ownership. Yep. The fact that men aren't considered strong and able to protect themselves unless they're armed is a huge issue within our society that we have to start discussing. Mm-hmm. The fact that exactly, it's absolutely absurd. We also have to talk about the fact that men are expected to be these protectors of women, when in reality, everybody should just be able to protect themselves as a person and as an individual, regardless of sex. Like, I hate having this pressure on me that I feel as an 18-year-old man to as society, not by the people around me, but society in general, I'm expected to be this leader when in reality everybody's voice at this table matters. I'm given all these interviews and I get a disproportionate amount of questions compared to the people that I go out and do interviews with. Like when I'm in Ferguson and I'm doing interviews with local Black Lives Matter activists, they only interview me and ask how Ferguson is affected by police brutality. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I am a cisgender white male from a privileged community. It is incredibly disrespectful to write off anybody's suffering, no matter where they come from. Mm-hmm. And those are the issues that we should start to talk about when we're talking about, before we talk about arming more people, why aren't we talking about why we feel the need to arm ourselves in the first place as a society?
Ooh, there's just I feel like Oprah, where I'm like, tweet it, tweet it. But Oprah said, oh, she's so cute. It's that's where the age differential comes in, because Oprah's thing is tweet, tweet. And I'm like, we don't say that. Okay, it's cool. I'm like, it's all good. So I just have so many questions, but I also want to be sensitive to time because I know we got started late. I don't know where the person is who's supposed to be giving me the signal about Q&A questions. How long have we been up here? 45. Oh, okay, so we are I was like, I feel like we're starting to be over. Okay, I have maybe one more, and then I'll get into other questions. Oh God, I have so many more on the opposite page. Hold on, I'm sorry. I need to figure out which one I'm going. Okay, this is good. This one's for the audience. So at the march, I got chills watching you guys. And when Emma said, fight with your lives before someone else has to, how can we, as your supporters and as constituents, how would you say we can best contribute to this movement with and for you?
So, I like to talk about there are 3 levels. There's participation, which is, voting, registering other people to vote, making sure that, you are doing everything that you possibly can to be active in, your political sphere. Then there's activating, which is, maybe going to canvass for candidates that you like, or doing phone banking, or, taking time out of your day to do something that affects the political sphere in your local hometown, or maybe you do phone banking for another senator. And then I also say there's donating, which is directly supporting our cause and pushing our movement forward. And that's something that we think those 3 levels are you can pick one, you can pick all 3, you can do whatever. And I think that they're really good places to start. You don't have to be a politician to be interested in politics. You can always be informed. There's so much access to information out there. And I think more than ever, I've never seen in my life this much energy around an election. And it's a midterm year. And we see companies like Uber and Lyft that are offering free rides to the polls also. And that is just so important, especially for college students or elderly students or elderly people that maybe don't have access all the time. Yeah. Hey, you never know.
There are some elderly students. Listen.
You never know.
I'm not laughing about that. I just want to know where they go to school.
But I think that there's more access to everything now, more than ever. Even though there is still voter suppression, there is registering online and registering at your local place, early voting, same-day voting. These are all things that need to be taken advantage of that people just don't realize and people don't know. And it's our jobs as citizens to inform the people that don't know about it.
And also, I think that, I can only say, in my personal opinion, there's 2 things I always ask from people. And we have this kind of, this phrase we say, it's register, educate, vote. Because if you look at being engaged in our system, I think that's a very simple formula into being a civically engaged individual. Then after that, it's something that it's not this, it's this abstract concept of being proactive rather than reactive. Because imagine if every person in this room was proactive years ago. We could have saved so many lives, because it shouldn't have happened to me and to my friends for us to be on the stage to be fighting about this. We should have cared about other communities from the beginning. And that's not to say that people don't. But oftentimes what we've seen is when it's time to take a stand, the individuals that do, they're few and far between. And for us, we always want people to know that you can actively take steps to save lives. You don't have to stand on a stage. You don't have to give a speech. You don't have to do live TV interviews. It's whether it's like Alex said, whether it's phone banking for a senator or door knocking or registering voters. Those things are what can help save lives at the end of the day. And it's also about being empathetic towards your neighbors, because for us, what we've seen is we got a reaction. Our community got a reaction that, frankly, a lot of communities haven't gotten in the light of tragedy. Because as you know now, there are people dying in this country, but the sad reality of it is that you just won't know about it. Today I found out there was another shooting in Jacksonville. 6 people were shot. How many people knew that? And that just goes to say that there's so much going on at all times. If we as an individual can be that person just to do that one good thing, I think that goes a whole long way. And I think also for us, it's realizing that it's about the little victories. And you don't have to do this grand gesture. It's about the little things in our daily lives that we can change, to make the world a better place. Around the time where everyone's going crazy, it's like, oh, water's running out, the world's about to end. And that was the whole thing. Even now I still do it. It's like, even when you're brushing your teeth, just to cut the water off. You know what I'm saying? It's those little actions that can end up going a whole long way.
And like I've learned a lot throughout this process. Like I've learned more of the past 8 months than I have in the past 8 years of my life. And I think there's several really important things that I've learned about what we can do as individuals. First off is learning that as a society, like we have to be more willing to accept the fact that people can learn from like their past, that we can change as individuals, and what we can't let, no matter who we are, we can't let like our past define us. We can't let the past be an excuse for us not to learn in the present, you know? So for example, I look back at my speech at the march and I think about how divisive it was and how angry I was and how I had every right to be that way. But what I've realized is like this has to be a unifying issue where we all come together around this, and the fact that this is a public health crisis that we have to face as individuals, not as one party, but not as one country, but as humanity, and work together to solve it together. So like when I look back at the time that like Donald Trump called me, or like the White House called me, and I hung up on them because of it was out of pure frustration. See, like yeah, like that felt good in the short term because of how frustrated I was with the fact that our president has taken $30 million from the NRA and now is going to act like he actually cared about people dying. But what I realized is I could have used that conversation to talk to him about the fact that he says he's not owned by anyone, and if he really wants to prove that, he can stand up to the NRA, you know? And I've learned a lot throughout that process. And one of the main things that I've learned is one of the principles of peace and like nonviolent movements that Dr. Martin Luther King came up with, which is attacking the sources of evil, not the people perpetrating it. Because we have to realize as a society, the only time that movements are ever, the only time I've realized that the only time movements are ever successful is when we can end the tribalism for each other and stop pointing the finger at each other and point the finger at the source of that issue.
Yeah. Because making us fight with each other is a distraction tactic so they can stay in power and they can take checks like $30 million from the NRA.
Or like the fact that we can let people like Donald Trump say that immigrants are coming into this country, don't pay taxes, and aren't their best. Like they aren't like what countries give us that are their best. First of all, no country has ever given us their best, and that's what makes America a great place. When Alexander Hamilton came here when he was 17 years old from the Caribbean, he was fleeing a hurricane. Now we have hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans that are coming to the mainland United States that are coming here to like find a better life because back home in Puerto Rico it's been destroyed because of the United States' horrible response to that hurricane, right? And they're both in the exact same situation, and we've gotten to the point as a society, like as a group of people that live in this country, that we can let people like Jared Kushner, who hasn't paid any federal income tax on $434 million, say that immigrants are the problem because they're not paying taxes, when in reality they're a huge surplus to the economy that add billions of dollars when they're the real people that are hurting us.
Yeah. Well, it's such a conversation about investment because we're told that we don't have the money for health care, and we're told that we can't possibly fix a gun problem, and we're told that there's just too many people in our country for us to have good public schools in every state, but then we give a $1.6 trillion tax cut to the richest people on earth who have yachts, not like one, but many, and we add another $600 billion surplus to the United States military. And I wouldn't be mad about a military surplus if it was actually benefiting our service members who are not making decent salaries for defending this country, but it isn't. It's like, it's going into defense contract company spending to build planes that the president thinks are actually invisible. Yeah. Like,
I know you said something
we're
about
investing
math.
in the wrong things.
That doesn't add
the
up.
money exists. We're just spending it really poorly.
Like Florida's like, aren't we like dead? Like, I forgot who I was speaking to. It might have been you. And it was like, Florida, if you didn't know, is dead last in mental health spending. And that kind of makes sense because when you see the headline, Florida man does this, Florida man does that. And like that, I think that's what plays into that. And also, like, and they said that if you added up, I think it was like some crazy statistic where if you took, I think it was like all 49 states, right? And I think it's like you did some weird equation to it, and we were still dead last. Like, I wish I could land it better for you, but that just goes to tell you that first off, I get $100 and that looks like I hit the jackpot, right? So just imagine how insane. What'd you say? Was it a 1.6 trillion?
$1.6 trillion tax cut to billionaires, but we're gonna cut Medicaid now.
You know what? So I just like I was just telling you earlier. You said at the end of the day, every time you add 2 plus 2, it equals 4. Yep. But just you saying that, like, just something doesn't add up, and I think seeing that we see that, and like sometimes I just think like it leaves you like wondering and sitting to yourself like, how does this even make sense? It doesn't. You're right. It doesn't make sense, and especially for me. And it's like I said, like when I tell you right now, I can guarantee you, if each and every one of you were given $1.6 trillion, you would not know how to spend, I'm telling you, 10% of it, right? But somehow I think our government, time and time again, not even our government, but individuals who deem that necessary, find it time and time again not to increase these tax breaks for the people who don't need it at all. And it often leads, like you said, individuals trying to figure out whether or not they have health care. It leaves our veterans wondering whether or not they can get the proper care after fighting for their country, fighting for us. So I think it's time. I think it's really time now that we take this stand and let our politicians know that this is over, because we won't stand for this anymore. And I think it's our job as the American citizens is to vote them out and to vote in morally just leaders, because the time is now. And I think what we've allowed is to let people know that this is our time. Since February 14th, I think it's over 70 bills have been passed relating to 70 plus gun violence prevention bills have been passed since February 14th. You guys. And it's not only thanks to us. There are groups that have been fighting this fight for years upon years.
True.
We had a chance to meet a great organization by the name of Life Camp in New York, and it's run by a beautiful not only beautiful but an amazing woman by the name of Erica Ford. She has this gray afro, and it's like, is this what God looks like? I mean,
you guys should be following her on social media. She is amazing.
Yeah, definitely.
But what it showed us is that this fight has been going on for so long, and it's up to us to let people know that like we are not the only ones doing this. That there are people who will continue doing this after us, who have been doing this before us, and like that's like I said, that's empowering. Because like I said, like we get so caught up in the apparent state of things. We see negative headline after negative headline after negative headline, and after time, it's honestly depressing. It leaves you wondering to yourself, like, what can I actually do? And then at one point, it's whether or not you see dreamers stand against just the blatant racism that exists in this country. You see us stand against not wanting our friends to die anymore. You see people trying to get the point across of Black Lives Matter. To let you know that, wow, there are individuals who actually are doing this work day in and day out. And that's sometimes, like I said, sometimes that's really all you need. And it's to take that energy, not only to the polls on November 6th, but then there's another election in 2020. Then there's another, that one's really important, guys. So we need everyone to show up. Yes. And then there's another election. Because right now what we're going to do is that we're going to shift the voting culture in this country. Because we have to remove this stigma from politics. Because politics as an idea isn't dirty. It isn't dirty. Caring about your community isn't this dirty deed. But what we've allowed is we've allowed money-hungry politicians, we've allowed corrupt organizations to fear-monger, to feed into our fears and let us know that if you don't do this, all your freedoms are will be taken away. If you don't do this, this is going to happen to you. But then what we have to do is you have to take a step back, breathe, everyone breathe.
You're still free.
Yeah, you're still free, right? Even though we have more incarcerated people than any other country, that's tea. But
spill that tea.
But we have to take that step back and see that if we all actually participated in the system, I really do believe that it will work in our favor.
We got to make voting great again, people.
And if I can piggyback that, people who say that they're not political, my response is always, oh, because you're privileged. Because when you say you're not political, it's because you have enough privilege in your life to think that being politically active or politics becoming a dumpster fire won't affect you.
See, I have no choice but to be political. Being a black man in America,
yes.
it's just,
it is up to us. And by the way, to your point, civic engagement matters all of the time. I have a reminder set in my phone every Monday. Call your reps. I'm like, hi, it's me again. Guess what I still care about? And it matters, and we all should do that. Every person in this nation should call their representatives, have conversations, make sure you vote in every election, not just the presidential. Also, like, if you only vote in presidential elections, you are exercising your privilege. You have lost the right to it.
Yeah, and somebody brought up to me, like, a really interesting way of thinking of privilege the other day. I wish I was smart enough to come up with it
Sorry, I keep
myself.
getting the signal.
But just as, like, one last thing is, like, I was in an activist summit, and there was somebody from, like, there was a Black Lives Matter activist that was talking there. I wish I remembered their name, but they said privilege is not about what you've had to live through. It's about what you haven't had to live through.
Yes.
And that's what it's about. So vote November 6th and in every election.
Yes.
So that you don't have to all of a sudden become political.
So you guys have literally answered every single question that the audience submitted through this, but there's one that I think is perfect to end on, because it's honestly the best Q&A question I've ever seen at one of these. And I don't know what parent said this, because the name's not on it, but the card says, I dragged my 16-year-old son here. He's exhausted from studying and has 2 tests tomorrow. Why is it important for him to be here?
Where are you?
Show yourself.
I feel like you know, but there might be just like a button for the end.
I think it's extremely important because I can say it for a fact. When I was 16 years old, I obviously, having parents, who uber political, I'm just like, miss me with all that. I was an athlete, just playing basketball, and it's just like, my mind wasn't on this. Obviously, you know what's going on. You see police brutality. You see the government, what we had, the government we had just being ripped right under us, and you oftentimes when you're in a position when you don't have to care, like, it's in a sense, it was almost privileged because I didn't have to worry about what was going on until I realized that you don't realize like how much you're needed until headlines start popping up. You don't realize how much your involvement matters until you have to cry over the casket of your dead best friend. You don't realize how much that really matters. And I think even it doesn't matter whether you're 12, whether you're 80, whether you're 16. It's just about, like I said, it's about caring about one another, because you not participating in the system does someone in this country an injustice. Mm-hmm. And that's the reality of it. And what I can say is that, and that's not a way to tell you that, no, you're not doing enough. That's not the thing, because it doesn't matter what age. If you felt within yourself that you want to start being engaged, now that's a great start. But what I can say is just that if you care about this country and you care about the people of this country, it is your duty to be engaged, and it feels good I remember when I casted my first vote in the 2020 elections. I felt good after, because I felt that I did something good in the world, because there's power in your vote. Yeah. And oftentimes, we need just to realize, like, I'm powerful. Like, this one single vote actually does matter. And we saw that. We saw that if everyone just realized that, yes, my vote does matter, that right now things would look a whole lot different.
We wouldn't be here right now.
We wouldn't be here right now.
I think that, another thing that's very important to note, and this is something that I say, and I know that, and it hurts me so badly every time I say it, but it's something that really hits, is that the wristbands you see us wear and the ribbons on our shirts, they used to be people. Mm. And this is what we have to remember them by. There are people that will forever remain 14 and 15 and 16 and 17 and 18. There are people that will forever remain 7 and 2 months old and 3 months old because of gun violence and because of so many issues that plague this country. And don't wait. Be proactive. Do not be reactive, because it will be too late, and we cannot let any more communities or any more schools or any more churches or any more temples or any more concerts or anywhere in this country be afflicted by gun violence.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you seems inadequate after that, but just thank you. And I know we've exceeded our time, and thank you all for staying. I know tomorrow is Monday, and someone here has 2 tests, so I hope that they go very well.
I hope you pass your test, man.
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you guys for everything you're doing, and for, in a time that feels scary, for quite literally shining a spotlight on hope, because we need it.
I was never going to be the first one to make the move. Okay.